Dr. Alina Carter had always been a woman of reason. She prided herself on her ability to dissect problems with precision, backed by data, logic, and unyielding skepticism. In her world, time travel was a concept relegated to science fiction novels and B-movie plots. Yet, here she was, in her small, cluttered apartment near the university campus, staring at a man who claimed to have traveled from the future. The storm outside howled like a warning. Alina had been sitting at her desk, poring over a set of quantum data that refused to make sense when the knock on the door came. She had half expected it to be her colleague, Dr. Jensen, who sometimes stopped by late at night to discuss research. But when she opened the door, she was met with something far stranger. A man stood on the doorstep, drenched from the rain, his clothes tattered and worn. His eyes were wild, yet sharp, too sharp. They darted around as if he could see beyond the walls of her apartment, beyond time itself. "I'm sorry to bother you," the man said, his voice rough but urgent. "I need your help." Alina hesitated. Her first instinct was to slam the door, but something about the man's presence made her pause. "Who are you?" "My name is Kale," he replied. "I'm from the year 2093. I need you to listen to me very carefully. The world is going to collapse, and if we don't act soon, it will be too late." Alina blinked, disbelieving. "From the future, are you? Are you serious?" He nodded, as if the idea was not only possible, but undeniable. "I know it sounds impossible, but I've seen it, Dr. Carter. I've lived through it. The signs are everywhere. And you're the one who can stop it." She studied him, wondering if she was being pranked. Maybe someone was playing some sort of elaborate joke, or perhaps he was mentally ill. His appearance, alone a man in ragged clothes, with a look of desperation in his eyes, did little to inspire confidence. But then there was something else. A certain certainty in his words that made her hesitate. "You need to come inside," she said, stepping aside reluctantly. He didn't waste any time. As soon as the door closed behind him, Kale's eyes darted to her desk where she had scattered papers and scribbled notes. "You're working on quantum mechanics. You're close to unlocking something," he said, as though it were the most natural thing in the world. "It's not just physics, though. It's the key to everything." Alina's pulse quickened. "How do you know that?" "I'm not just from the future," Kale said, sitting at her desk, as if he belonged there. "I'm a part of the team that discovered time travel. But that's not the point. The point is this. What you're working on, the equations, the anomalies, you're very close to solving it. You're going to build the device that could change everything. But it won't just change the way we look at time. It will change the world in ways no one expects." Her skepticism wavered, but she was a scientist, and science demanded proof. "Okay, let's say, for a second, I believe you," Alina said, crossing her arms. "How do you know all this? How do you know what I'm working on?" He stared at her for a moment, a flicker of something passing through his eyes. Regret, or perhaps the weight of his knowledge. "Because I've seen it. I've seen the future. The collapse begins slowly at first. Political instability, economic crashes, natural disasters, and then it all spirals out of control. People don't listen. They don't act in time." Lena felt a chill run down her spine. "What collapse? What are you talking about?" Kale leaned in, his voice dropping to a whisper. "Everything you think you know is about to fall apart. The wars, the famine, the disease, all coming. But you can stop it. You have to stop it. You're the only one who can." Elena's mind raced. She had heard similar warnings in political speeches, in news reports about climate change and social unrest. But this was different. There was something about the way Kale spoke, so certain, so desperate, that made her wonder if maybe, just maybe, he wasn't lying. "Why me?" Alina asked. "Why come to me?" Because you're the one who will build it, Kale said, his voice firm. The device? The one that can reverse it all. You've already started building the foundations. I've seen it. You have the knowledge and you have the will. You just don't know it yet. Alina opened her mouth to respond, but the words caught. In her throat, it was insane. It couldn't be true. But there was something in his eyes, something she couldn't ignore. Kale stood up abruptly, his hands trembling slightly. Listen to me, Alina. You have no time. You need to act now, before it's too late. The urgency in his voice was like a bell ringing in her ears. Was it madness, or was it the truth? Tell me what I need to do, she said, her voice barely above. A whisper. Kale met her gaze, his face lined with a grim resolve. You need to listen. The world will end. Alina sat in stunned silence, her mind swirling with disbelief and curiosity. Kale's words hung in the air, unsettling her more than she cared to admit. A time traveler. From the future? It sounded like a bad plot twist in one of the cheap science fiction novels she sometimes read for escape. And yet, there was something in his eyes, something raw and desperate. That felt too real to dismiss entirely. She glanced at the clock. Hours had passed since he arrived, and in that time, Kale had spoken of terrible things. Wars, climate catastrophes, economic collapse. All of it sounded far too grand to be true. But then again, wasn't it exactly the kind of apocalyptic scenario that had been discussed in academic circles for years? Global warming, resource depletion, geopolitical tensions. These weren't new ideas. They were warnings, just like Kale's. The question was, had he really traveled back from the future to deliver them? How do I even begin to believe you? Alina finally asked, her voice betraying a mix of skepticism and unease. Kale ran a hand through his damp hair. His expression softened, almost as if he understood how impossible this all sounded. I understand this is hard to take in. But the evidence is all around us, even now. I'll show you. All you have to do is pay attention. Alina stood up from her desk, pacing across the room, her mind racing. She couldn't just take his word for it. She needed proof, something tangible, something real. The problem was, the more she thought about it, the more his words seemed to latch on to things she had already been noticing herself. The world was on edge. There were small, unsettling signs of disarray, strange weather patterns, political unrest. The breakdown of social trust. Maybe Kale was just another person echoing those fears, but there was a part of her that couldn't shake the feeling that this was different. Okay, she said, folding her arms. What do you suggest I do? Kale smiled. Faintly, start by looking at the data. Look at the things you've been working on. Your research into quantum mechanics, it's not just about unlocking new physics, Alina. It's about what that knowledge will mean for the future. She froze. She'd been so consumed by her work, so fixated on her equations, that she hadn't stopped to consider the bigger implications. The quantum model she was developing wasn't just theoretical. It had practical applications, some of which could potentially reshape the entire foundation of how time and energy functioned. You think it could prevent the collapse? She asked, more to herself than to Kale. I know it can, he replied, his voice steady. But only if you understand the pattern. There are key moments in the next few years where the wrong decisions will set everything in motion. If you don't act now, the future you'll see won't be a world you recognize. Alina turned back to her desk, her fingers trembling slightly as she opened the quantum model on her computer. She scrolled through the latest data, a mix of variables and equations that seemed to defy conventional physics. In a moment of clarity, something clicked. She saw a missing link in her research that, if correct, could explain how to manipulate the fabric of time. Her heart skipped a beat. Could Kale be right? Was this what he was talking about? The idea was staggering. She had always believed in the theoretical potential of her work, but seeing it laid out like this, with Cale's warnings echoing in her mind, made the weight of her research feel unbearable. If what he said was true, she wasn't just studying theoretical physics. She was holding the key to saving or destroying the future. Cale was watching her closely, almost as if he could sense the shift in her thinking. "You understand now, don't you?" he said softly. "This is bigger than anything you've ever worked on. It's not just about physics. It's about the survival of humanity itself." She took a deep breath, trying to steady her racing thoughts. "Okay," she said, her voice trembling with the enormity of what was happening. "Let's say I believe you. What now?" Cale nodded, his face serious. "We need to move fast. You're not the only one who's been watching the world unravel. The powers that be, governments, corporations, they're already starting to position themselves to control the fallout. They'll only make things worse. If we don't act, they'll lock down the future for their own gain. And when that happens, there will be no turning back." Alina's mind reeled as she processed his words. "So, what's the plan? What exactly do you want me to do?" "We need to prevent the key events from happening. The first domino must be stopped before it falls. There's a conference in 2 weeks, the Global Resource Summit. The decisions made there will accelerate the collapse. We need to get in and make sure the right people hear the truth. We need to convince them that there is another way." Alina felt her pulse quicken. This was real. Cale's urgency, the terrifying clarity in his eyes, it was no longer just a theory. "And if they don't listen?" He looked at her grimly. "Then it will be too late." For the first time since Cale had arrived, Alina felt a deep, bone-chilling sense of urgency. This wasn't just a madman's rambling, it was a warning. And if she didn't act, she might not just lose her research. She could lose the entire future. "Okay," she said, standing straighter. "I'm in. Let's stop the collapse." Cale smiled. The days following Elena's decision felt like a blur. She dove headfirst into her research, barely sleeping, trying to piece together the fragmented equations and concepts Cale had mentioned. But no matter how hard she worked, there was an unsettling truth she couldn't ignore. She wasn't alone in her quest for answers. Every move she made was being observed, whether by the media, government agencies, or corporate entities with its own agenda. Cale had warned her that the powers who controlled the future would not let the world's problems go unchecked. They would act, but they would act for themselves, not for humanity. She could already see the cracks forming. A global resource summit was scheduled in 2 weeks. It's a major conference that would be the world's last chance to negotiate a fair, collective solution to the climate and energy crises. Yet, Cale had made it clear, the wrong decisions at that summit would lock humanity on a path of irreversible collapse. As much as Alina tried to focus on her work, the pressure of time weighed heavily on her. There were still many pieces missing. In her quantum model, the equations were delicate, far more intricate than she had anticipated. But the urgency Cale instilled in her refused to let her stop. She had to finish it. She had to unlock the solution. "I can't do this alone," she muttered to herself one evening as she reviewed the latest data. Her office felt cold, despite the summer heat outside. Papers scattered across the desk. Screens filled with rows of indecipherable data. She couldn't do it. She needed help. The world needed help. That's when the thought hit her. She picked up her phone, staring at the screen for a long moment. One name stood out in her mind, a person she trusted implicitly. Dr. Lucas Holloway, a renowned climate scientist and longtime colleague. They had worked together in the past on energy sustainability projects, and Lucas was as committed to solving global problems as Alina was, but Cale's warning echoed in her mind. Not everyone can be trusted. Still, she had no choice. Lucas was one of the few people she could rely on. If she wanted to stop the collapse, she needed to bring him in. She pressed call. Lucas picked up on the third ring. "Alina, what's going on? I haven't heard from you in weeks. You okay?" She could hear the concern in his voice, and for a moment, she almost hesitated. Should she tell him the truth? Should she mention Kale, time travel, the quantum breakthrough? "Lucas, I need you to listen to me carefully," she said, cutting to the chase. "There's something very serious happening right now. We don't have much time." There was a pause on the other end. "Okay, go on. What's this about?" "I know this is going to sound crazy, but I need you to trust me. There's a global collapse on the horizon. We have 2 weeks before the world makes decisions that will set us on a path we can't recover from. I need your help to stop it." Lucas was quiet for a long moment, clearly processing what she had said. She could practically hear the wheels turning in his mind. "Alina, are you all right? What's going on? What do you mean a global collapse?" She knew this wouldn't be easy to explain. It sounded insane. But there was no time to sugarcoat things. There's no easy way to say this. "But I'm working with someone who claims to be from the future. He says humanity's on the brink of disaster unless we can get the right people to listen. We need to stop the summit from happening the way it's planned, or everything will spiral out of control." Another pause. This time, she could hear Lucas breathing, steady but tense. "You're telling me you've got a time traveler in your life now?" His tone was half laughing, half disbelieving. "Alina, this sounds like something out of the Twilight Zone. Are you sure you're okay?" "I'm not joking, Lucas," she said, her voice firm. "I've seen the evidence. Kaylee's seen the future. I've been working on the model, and it all adds up. We're on the brink of a collapse, natural disasters, economic ruin, wars, everything is lining up just like he said it would. But there's a way out. We can prevent it, but we need to act fast." Lucas exhaled sharply. "I don't know, Alina. This is? I mean, how am I supposed to believe any of this? You're talking about time travel, saving the world? It's insane. You've got to admit that. I know it sounds impossible, but we don't have the luxury of dismissing it. Lucas, I need your expertise on the climate and energy sectors. There are players at this summit who can either make a real difference or plunge us into crisis. I need you there with me to make sure they hear the truth, and that we have a fighting chance to change things." Alina could hear the hesitance in his voice, the internal battle. "This is a lot, Alina. I don't even know where to begin. We begin with the truth, and we don't have time to waste." There was a long pause before Lucas finally spoke again. "All right, I'll help you, but I still don't know what to make of all this time travel stuff, but I trust you. Let's figure this out together." Alina let out a breath she didn't realize she'd been holding. Kay was in. She had Lucas on her side. "Thank you," she said quietly. "We'll need to move quickly. I'll brief you on the details. We meet in 2 days." As she ended the call, Alina felt a rush of hope and dread intertwining. She had her first ally in this fight. But the weight of what she was asking, what she was attempting, was heavier than any. Alina had expected the world to react to Kale's warnings with denial and disbelief. What she hadn't anticipated was how quickly things would start to unravel, even before the Global Resource Summit. Kale's dire predictions weren't just abstract theories anymore. They were unfolding in real time, and the world's leaders seemed helpless to stop it. The first sign of the coming collapse came when a massive test earthquake struck the East African Rift. The magnitude 9.2 tremor devastated entire villages, killing thousands and leaving millions more displaced. It was the kind of disaster that should have prompted a global response, immediate aid, coordinated relief efforts, and long-term rebuilding plans. But what followed was a chaotic scramble for resources. with countries hoarding supplies and refusing to share. The UN's emergency response system was overwhelmed, and relief efforts became a battleground of political rivalries as the news reports rolled in. Alina found herself glued to her computer, watching the unfolding crisis. Every detail matched Cale's warnings. The patterns were undeniable. The quake was just the first in a series of escalating natural disasters that would soon ripple across the globe. Yet the world's governments seemed more concerned with their own interests than with preventing a worldwide catastrophe. "What's going on, Alina?" Lucas's voice crackled over the phone, snapping her out of her daze. "This isn't just coincidence. Something is wrong. The markets are crashing. Oil prices are through the roof. Everyone's panicking." Alina rubbed her eyes, exhaustion creeping in. She hadn't slept in days, consumed by the urgency of her mission. "It's happening, Lucas. It's just like Cale said. And it's only going to get worse." This is exactly what he warned us about: the instability, the breakdown of trust between nations. "Do you think the earthquake is connected to the summit?" Lucas asked, his voice tinged with fear. "If the world can't even handle a natural disaster like this, how are they going to tackle the real issues? Climate change, resource depletion. What if the summit makes everything worse?" Alina stood and walked to the window, her thoughts swirling. Outside, the city seemed peaceful, unaware of the storm brewing on the horizon. But inside her, there was no peace. The evidence was stacking up, and it was undeniable. The collapse had already begun. "I don't know," she said softly, her mind racing. "But we need to act fast. We can't afford to wait for them to fix this. The decisions they make at the summit will set the course for the next decade. If we can't change their minds, it'll be too late. They had to stop it before it." Was set in motion, the following days brought wave after wave of disasters. Floods in Asia, wildfires across the American West, and political instability in Europe. Each event seemed to feed into the next, creating a global cascade of chaos. Leaders began to pull back into their own nations, securing borders and hoarding resources. The interconnected global economy began to crumble as supply chains were severed and markets teetered on the brink of collapse. Cale's voice echoed in Alina's mind. "The tipping point is closer than you think. The world's leaders won't act until it's too late. You have to stop them before the collapse becomes inevitable." But how could she? She had no political power, no army. She was just a scientist, working with a man who claimed to have traveled through time. And now, even the few allies she had seemed overwhelmed by the scale of the disasters. Alina's phone buzzed on her desk. It was a message from Cale. "It's happening faster than I predicted. The summit is the last chance. I've sent someone to help you." "Trust him." Alina frowned. "Sent someone? Who?" She had no time to think about it before a knock at the door interrupted her. She opened it cautiously, half expecting another stranger. But this time, it was a man she recognized, Michael Everly, a former colleague from the university. He had been part of her research team on energy sustainability, and though they had parted ways years ago, she knew he was as deeply committed to the world's future as she was. "Alina," Michael said, stepping inside, his eyes filled with a grim determination. "Cale sent me. We don't have much time. Things are falling apart too quickly, and we need to get to the summit before it's too late." She stared at him, unsure how to process the moment. First Cale, now Michael. She had barely wrapped her mind around Cale's warnings, and now it seemed the world was rushing to meet her. "What's happening, Michael? You're not the only one who's noticed things are falling apart. This earthquake, the floods, it's only the beginning, isn't it?" Michael nodded, his expression hardening. "It's just the beginning. We've been tracking a series of catastrophic events linked to resource scarcity. This summit, if the wrong decisions are made, it will trigger a full-blown collapse." Alina felt the weight of his words settle heavily on her shoulders. We have to stop them. But how? Michael set a folder down on the desk in front of her. It was filled with intelligence reports and data models. As Alina flipped through it, her heart sank. The information confirmed her worst fears. There were global power players, corporations, and governments who were already positioning themselves to dominate. The remaining resources, the summit wasn't about saving the planet. It was about who would control what little was left. That's why we need to make them see the bigger picture, Michael said, his voice low. We can't just convince them to share resources. We need to make them understand that their actions are going to destroy everything, not just for the poor and marginalized, but for them too. Alina nodded. This wasn't just about saving the world. It was about changing the course of human history. We don't have much time, she said, her resolve hardening. We have to get to the summit and we have to make them listen. The chaos outside was just the beginning. The next few days felt like they were collapsing in on themselves. Alina and Michael moved quickly, working to prepare for the Global Resource Summit. But even as they raced against time, the world around them seemed to be falling apart. Predictions had been accurate, and every new disaster seemed to accelerate the chaos. Wildfires ravaged the Amazon, floods tore through Southeast Asia, and violent protests erupted in the streets of major cities. The global economy had been sent into freefall, and governments, paralyzed by their own fear and greed, turned inward, hoarding resources rather than coordinating to solve the crisis. Alina could feel the weight of the situation pressing down. On her shoulders, they had to act. The summit was just days away, and if they didn't manage to get their message across, there would be no turning back. The summit was being held in Geneva, and it would bring together world leaders, corporate moguls, and environmental advocates, essentially the most powerful people on the planet. Michael and Alina would have to navigate a labyrinth of politics, egos, and conflicting interests to reach the right people. But who would listen? Who would even believe them? I'm telling you, this is madness, Michael said as he pored over the latest reports. The world is spiraling out of control. We have to get to the core decision makers before they make their choices. If we don't stop them, we're looking at a decade of escalating disasters. Climate collapse, resource wars, even a global famine. Alina leaned back in her chair, the strain of the past week taking its toll. Her eyes were bloodshot, her mind struggling to stay focused. I know, but we need a plan. You can't just walk in there and hope someone will listen. They'll dismiss us as fringe activists, as people who don't understand the reality of the situation. We've got one shot at this, Michael said, flipping through his notes. We need to get our hands on something concrete, something undeniable. I've got contacts who can help us get into the summit. But we need a way to prove that our message isn't just theory. We need to show them the truth. The truth. That was the problem. Everything Kale had said, everything she had researched, was built on probabilities. What if she couldn't convince anyone that they were standing on the edge of the abyss? If Kale's warnings were just warnings, would they be enough to alter the course of history? I've been thinking, Michael continued, snapping Alina from her thoughts. We need a real-world example. Something that shows how bad things really are. If we can get access to the resource allocation models they've been working with, we can show them the numbers. They'll see that they can't keep going like this. That's our proof. Alina frowned. How do we get those models? Do you know how tight security will be? There's no way we can get that information legally. Michael smirked. I'm not planning on asking for permission. We have to get inside their systems, hack into their data streams. It's risky, but if we can pull it off, we'll have everything we need to make them listen. Alina stared at him, her heart pounding. She had never considered this kind of root breaking into secure government and corporate systems. But desperation had a way of pushing people into corners they never thought they'd go. "We don't have time for anything else," Michael said, reading her hesitation. "If we want to make sure this summit doesn't turn into another disastrous power grab, we need to act now. The world is on the verge of total collapse." He was right. They had no choice. She couldn't afford to play by the rules anymore. Not when the future of humanity was at stake the day before the summit. Alina and Michael were standing outside a sleek, glass-fronted building in Geneva. The air was cold, and there was a palpable tension in the atmosphere. Behind them, an armored convoy pulled up to the entrance of the building, and a fleet of black SUVs unloaded high-level delegates, their faces cold and unreadable. It was the perfect example of what they were up against, a system that had been designed to protect the powerful and ignore the vulnerable. Inside the building, the summit was already starting to take shape. The global elite were arriving, but Alina and Michael were not there for the speeches or the panels. They were there for something far more dangerous. "The data. Are you sure about this?" Alina asked, her voice tight with anxiety. Michael looked at her, his eyes steely. "We don't have any other choice. We're getting in there, and we're getting that data." They had a plan, a dangerous, risky plan. Michael's contacts had helped them secure access to the building's security systems, allowing them to bypass most of the perimeter defenses. It wasn't perfect, but it was their best shot. They had one window of opportunity before the summit's formal activities began. Elena's heart raced as they slipped into the shadows, blending with the flow of staff and security personnel. Everything felt surreal, like they were players in a game where the stakes were higher than anyone could possibly imagine. As they made their way through the labyrinthine halls of the building, Alina couldn't shake the feeling that they were being watched. Every corner they turned, every security camera they passed, made her feel like they were one step away from being caught. But there was no turning back. They couldn't afford to fail. Michael stopped in front of a nondescript door. "This is it," he said, his voice barely a whisper. "I'll get us in." He pulled out a small device, attaching it to the door's access panel. There was a soft click, and the door swung open. Inside, a small server room hummed with the sound of activity. Michael immediately went to work, plugging in his laptop and starting to hack into the system. Alina stood guard, her breath shallow. As she listened, the tension in the server room was unbearable. Every click of Michael's keyboard felt like it reverberated through Elena's chest. Her eyes darted toward the door every few seconds, expecting security to burst in at any moment. The clock was ticking, and they had no idea how long they could stay hidden in plain sight. Michael was working at lightning speed, his fingers flying over the keyboard as lines of code cascaded across the screen. Elena tried to steady her breathing, but her pulse was racing. She could feel the weight of the world pressing on her shoulders. If they were caught now, all of their efforts would be for nothing. Worse, they might be thrown out of the summit and sent straight to jail. Almost there, Michael muttered under his breath. His eyes narrowed in concentration. Alina glanced over his shoulder at the screen. The data they were after was buried deep within the summit's security systems, an encrypted vault of resource allocation models, economic forecasts, and key decision-making documents that could reveal exactly what was happening behind closed doors. If they could expose those documents, they'd have undeniable proof of the corruption and incompetence driving the world to ruin. She took another quick look at the door. The building seemed eerily silent, but she knew better than to let her guard down. They were in the heart of the beast now, and even the slightest misstep could lead to disaster. "We're almost in," Michael said, his voice tight with tension. He was sweating now, his fingers still flying across the keyboard. Alina could see the strain on his face. If anything went wrong, the consequences would be catastrophic, not just for them, but for everyone else involved. This was no longer just about stopping a summit. It was about altering the course of history. Then, a sharp click echoed through the room. Michael's screen froze for a split second before flashing with a cascade of data. "We're in," Michael breathed, a small grin of triumph flickering on his face. "Got everything we need," Alina exhaled sharply, the knot in her stomach loosening slightly. They'd done it. But that didn't mean they were out of the woods yet. Now came the hard part, getting the data out without getting caught. Before she could speak, her phone buzzed in her pocket. She pulled it out cautiously, glancing at the screen. It was a message from Kale. "They know. Someone's onto you. Move, now." Elena's heart skipped a beat. What does he mean, someone's onto us?" she whispered. Michael stopped typing and glanced at her, his face pale. "This is bad. Someone's onto us." "How is that even possible, Elena?" urged, a note of panic creeping into his voice. "We need to go, now." Her pulse quickened as she shoved the phone back into her pocket. The warning sent an icy chill down her spine. They couldn't afford to wait around and figure it out. Kale's message was clear. They were compromised. Without another word, Michael quickly unplugged his laptop and shoved it into his bag. Alina grabbed the small device Michael had used to bypass security, shoving it into her own bag as they silently moved toward the door. But as they reached the threshold, Alina heard the unmistakable sound of footsteps coming down the hallway. "Shit," Michael's single quotes. Eyes locked with hers, and they both froze. The footsteps grew louder, and the unmistakable hum of a security guard's radio crackled faintly in the distance. Elena's breath caught in her throat. They couldn't get caught, not now. They had everything they needed. They had proof, but they were running out of time. "Do you have a plan?" Michael whispered, his voice barely audible. Elena's mind raced. She spotted an emergency exit sign at the far end of the corridor, glowing faintly in the dim light. It was a long shot, but it was their only shot. If they could get to the emergency stairwell, they might be able to slip out of the building before anyone realized they were missing. "Follow me," she said, trying to sound more confident than she felt. They moved quickly, ducking into the shadows as the footsteps grew louder. Elena's heart was pounding so loudly she was sure it would give them away. But she couldn't stop. They had to keep moving. They had to make it out. As they neared the exit, Michael grabbed her arm, pulling her back into the shadows. A security guard passed by, his flashlight sweeping through the corridor. Alina held her breath, praying they wouldn't be seen. The guard stopped just a few feet away, scanning the hallway with suspicion. For a moment, it felt like the world had stopped. Then, with a deep breath, the guard moved on, oblivious to their presence. Alina and Michael exhaled in unison, their hearts racing. "Let's go," Michael whispered urgently. They continued toward the emergency exit, finally reaching the door. Michael pushed it open carefully, and they stepped into the stairwell, moving quickly but cautiously as they descended the flight of stairs. Once they hit the bottom floor, they were in the clear. The streets of Geneva were just outside, bathed in the cold light of the street lamps. They stepped out into the night, blending into the crowds of people who had no idea what was happening inside the summit. "We did it," Alina said breathlessly, her legs trembling with the adrenaline that still surged through her body. "We have the data." Michael nodded, his face tight with anxiety. "Now we need to get it to the right people. The hard part is just beginning." Alina felt the weight of his words settle over her. The data they had just stolen wasn't just a file on a computer, was the future of the world. They could expose the truth. They might still have a chance to change the course of history, But as they disappeared into the darkened streets of Geneva, Alina couldn't shake the feeling that they weren't just fighting against time anymore, they were. The adrenaline from their narrow escape kept Alina and Michael moving, but as they navigated the dimly lit streets of Geneva, the gravity of their situation began to sink in. They had the date that the undeniable proof of the conspiracy and now they needed to find a way to make the world listen. But the deeper they got into this mission, the more Alina realized just how dangerous their actions had become. The data Michael had stolen was more than just resource models and economic forecasts. It contained detailed plans for a series of global initiatives that were being quietly pushed through by the wealthiest corporations and governments. Plans that would prioritize short-term profits over the survival of the planet. The documents revealed an elaborate scheme to further control the dwindling resources, from food and water to clean energy, while ignoring the desperate calls for climate action and sustainable development. These plans weren't just a betrayal of the planet, they were a blueprint for global inequality, condemning the poor to suffer while the rich fortified their positions. If the world leaders at the summit agreed to this plan, it would be the final nail in the coffin for billions of people. Michael glanced over at Alina, his face grim in the flickering light of the street lamps. We need to get this data into the hands of the right people, and fast. If we don't tiff, we let them go forward with this, it's over. They'll have the power to reshape the world into something unrecognizable. Alina nodded, her mind racing. She knew they couldn't take this to just anyone. The media could twist it, the political powers could suppress it. They needed people with credibility, people who could force the world's leaders to act. But who? Who could they trust? Have you thought about who we can go to? Alina asked, keeping her voice low as they turned down a quieter street. Michael didn't answer immediately, his brow furrowing. He had contacts, but most of them were either too compromised or too fearful to risk anything. But then, an idea seemed to spark in his mind. I have a friend, he said slowly. A journalist. She's with the Global Chronicles. She's done exposes on corporate corruption before. If anyone can get this into the public eye, it's her, but I don't know if she'll believe us. This is a lot to swallow. Alina's heart pounded. She didn't have time to question Michael's judgment. She had to trust him, and she had to act fast. The summit would begin the next day, and the clock was ticking. Where is she? Lena asked, her voice urgent. Paris, Michael said. She's covering the political climate over there. It's our best shot. We get on a plane tonight, and by morning, we'll be on her doorstep. The flight to Paris was long, but neither of them slept. Alina stared out the window at the dark expanse of the sky, her mind preoccupied by the thought of what they were about to do. They had no idea how this would play out. If the data made it into the wrong hands, it could trigger a global power struggle far worse than what they were trying to stop. If they failed to convince the world's media, they would have nothing left but their own lives to salvage. And that would mean nothing in the face of a global collapse. As they stepped off the plane, Michael's phone buzzed. He glanced at it and then turned to Alina, his expression tight. It's her, he said quietly. Lena. She's willing to meet us. They took a cab to a quiet cafe in the Marais district, a place Lena, the journalist, had chosen for its discretion. When they arrived, the first thing Elena noticed was how much older Lena looked compared to the last time they'd met. Face was marked by the wear of years of fighting an uphill battle in a world that was always one step ahead. Lena was waiting at a corner table, her dark hair pulled back in a messy bun, wearing a black leather jacket and jeans. She looked up as they approached, her piercing eyes taking in Michael and Alina with a calculating gaze. You've got 5 minutes, she said before they even sat down, her voice cool. What's this about, and why the secrecy? I'm not in the mood for games. Michael sat down first, followed by Alina. He wasted no time in pulling out his laptop and opening the folder containing the data they had stolen from the summit. "I know this sounds crazy, Lena," Michael began, "but this is going to change everything. The world is on the brink of collapse, and these people at the summit, they're pushing through a plan that will doom billions of people." Lena raised an eyebrow. "Doom billions? Okay, you seriously? Suggesting some kind of global conspiracy?" "I've heard all the theories, Michael, but you're talking about resources. The global economy, how do you expect me to take you seriously?" Alina leaned forward, opening her mouth to speak, but Michael cut in before she could. "You'll take us seriously when you see this. This is real. We need your help to expose it before it's too late." Lena studied them for a long moment before finally looking down at the laptop. Her fingers tapped nervously against the table. As she read through the data, the silence stretched on for what felt like an eternity. Finally, she closed the laptop with a sharp snap. This is real," she said, her voice now tinged with disbelief. "Where did you get this?" "There's no time for details," Alina said, her voice firm. "We need to go public with it now. If the summit goes ahead tomorrow without anyone knowing about this, it'll be a disaster." Lena's expression hardened, and for the first time, Alina saw a flicker of uncertainty in her eyes. "You're asking me to expose the most powerful people in the world. You realize what that means, right? They'll come after you. They'll come after all of us." "I don't care," Alina said, her voice resolute. "We can't let them control the future." Lena was silent for a moment, then nodded slowly. "Okay," she said finally. "Let's do it." Alina felt a rush of relief, but it was brief. The hardest part was still ahead. But they had a chance now. The minutes dragged on like hours as Lena absorbed the full weight of the data they had handed over. The cafe was now emptying, the late-night crowd thinning, and the street outside became quiet as the night deepened. The three of them sat huddled around the small table, the dim light casting long shadows across their faces. In that moment, it felt like the entire world was holding its breath. Lena didn't speak at first. She stared at the laptop screen, her fingers absently tracing the edges of her coffee cup, clearly processing the enormity of what she had just read. Alina felt the pressure mounting. Every second that passed without a decision felt like a second closer to everything falling apart. Finally, Lena spoke, her voice low and serious. "I don't need convincing. This is bad, really bad. But I need to ask, how do you think exposing this will change anything? The people behind this summit aren't just powerful, they control everything. The media, the governments, the corporations. You're asking me to take on people who can make us disappear in an instant." Michael exhaled sharply. "We're already out of options. They will destroy everything if we don't stop them. You saw the data, Lena. This isn't just greed, it's genocide by policy. Entire populations will be left to starve and suffer while a select few build a fortress around themselves." Lena's gaze hardened. "I know that. I've been fighting these people for years. But I've seen what happens when journalists expose the wrong people. They turn the public's anger into fear, redirect it. The system doesn't punish the guilty, it punishes anyone who gets too close to the truth." Alina leaned in, her voice fierce. "You're not alone this time. This isn't just about exposing corruption. This is about stopping a global catastrophe. We need to make sure that the public knows, not just the elite. We need to show them what's coming, what's been planned. And we have to do it before the summit starts tomorrow morning." Lena studied them both, her eyes narrowing with suspicion, but also a kind of reluctant understanding. She was a journalist, she knew the risks, but something in Elena's tone, something in the urgency of the situation, seemed to resonate with her. The world was at a tipping point. And despite the danger, Lena knew she couldn't turn away. "You're right," Lena said finally. "This is the biggest story I've ever come across. And it's not just a story, it's a chance to prevent the apocalypse. But it's going to take everything I've got, and then some. It's not enough to just release the information. I need to spark an international movement. The summit is a tipping point. If we get the right voices behind this, we can stop them. If we fail, the world will never recover." Alina nodded, her chest tight. "We're counting on you, Lena. We'll do whatever we can to help. But you're the one who can make this breakthrough." Lena took a deep breath, the weight of her decision sinking in. "I don't know if we have enough time." Willing to try, the next few hours were a blur. Lena worked feverishly, using her extensive network of contacts to gather the necessary pieces to back up the data they had presented. She reached out to political allies, independent organizations, and her own sources within the media. Meanwhile, Alina and Michael scoured the city for a secure location where they could launch their campaign. Every step they took felt like a calculated risk, like they were walking on the edge of a knife by the time the sun began to rise over Paris. Lena had set up a secure communication channel with key journalists and whistleblowers around the world. The plan was to leak the data at precisely the right moment during the first plenary session of the Global Resource Summit, when the eyes of the world would be focused on the event. They would have a window of opportunity to get the message out before the media could be silenced. But as the hours ticked closer to the summit's start, a gnawing sense of dread crept over Alina. She knew this was their last shot, but the enormity of what they were doing attacking the very heart of the system that controlled the fate of billions felt overwhelming. "Lena," Alina said quietly as they prepared to leave the cafe, "are you sure about this? We can't afford a single misstep." Lena gave her a sharp look. "Do you think I don't know that? This is the only way forward. Alina, we either succeed or the world goes to hell." "I'm not backing down now." As they left the cafe and headed toward their meeting point, Lena's phone buzzed again. She checked the message and then swore under her breath. "They know," Lena muttered, her voice tense. "I just got word from a source inside the summit. The security is tighter than we thought. They're looking for us." Elena's heart dropped. They couldn't afford to be found now, not when they were so close. "What does that mean for us?" "It means we move faster," Lena replied, already pulling up another encrypted communication line on her phone. "They'll try to block the leak, but we'll get it out anyway. It's only a matter of making sure it goes to the right people first." The plan was set. With seconds to spare, Lena sent the data to her secure media contacts. And the first bombshell dropped. The reaction was immediate. News outlets around the world exploded with reports of the shocking revelations. Governments scrambled to respond. Global markets jolted as the first images of the data showing a deliberate strategy to exploit dwindling resources and leave billions at the mercy of the elite began to surface. But even as the public outcry grew, Alina felt a rising sense of dread. This was only the beginning. The true battle wasn't in the headlines, was in what came next. The powerful, those who had masterminded the summit's agenda, would not go down without a fight. They were about to unleash everything they had to crush this rebellion. As the world watched in disbelief, Alina and Michael knew they had done their part. But they